Welcome to Conversations in Social Care, a unique and refreshing podcast for the social care sector, brought to you from Care Talk. Well, it's great to be back with you once again and our series of conversations in social care. And we've obviously been focusing on leaders in social care, people who are very influential and people with a good story to tell. And the lady I'm about to introduce certainly has that. She's the CEO of Mencap, and that's Edel Harris. Good morning, Edel.
Good morning. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you're a very, very busy lady. So we'll crack straight on if that's okay, Edel. Now, obviously, you started your working life in the Metropolitan Police. How did that role actually lead to social care?
Yes, it was a long time ago now, but I spent 11 years working in the Metropolitan Police, and I joined the police cadets straight from school. I was brought up in a family where going to university was just never discussed. It wasn't expected of us. And so we left school and we got a job immediately. And we'd had a presentation at school from the Metropolitan Police Cadets, and it just looked such great fun. You know, there was lots of sport and, you know, lots of kind of team building and character building exercises. It almost looked a bit like going to a holiday camp for a year before you went to the big training school to become a police officer. So I was very taken by the presentation, put in my application. It was the days when they recruited very few women. So I was one of only 2 female police cadets in that intake. But I did enjoy my time in the police an awful lot. I learned an awful lot about life, as you can imagine. But it wasn't really the job for me. I was not particularly good at kind of catching the baddies, and found that my leaning, particularly towards the end of my career in the police, was very much more towards the social side of policing. So I got involved in child protection work, for example. And there's one quick story I may share for those of the listeners who were old enough to remember the Wapping strikes, which
yes,
were,
I certainly do,
yes, the newspaper strikes. And I was on duty doing sort of 14-hour shifts, as a lot of us were at Wapping. And we were fed in a big warehouse, like a big hangar, 2 or 3 times during our shift. And we had to walk past some of the people that were on strike, some of the families, some people brought their children. And I remember one time going into the canteen and piling a tray full of food and bringing it out to feed the people that were on strike, which obviously was not what I was supposed to be doing. But I think that was a moment for me when I realized that maybe a job in either health or social care would probably suit me better. So when I had my children, I studied with the Open University and I got a degree in health and social care, and that's what took me into working in the third sector.
Excellent. Now, of course, you joined Mencap just before COVID hit. Now, adjusting to a new role in life is difficult at the best of times. How did you manage this transition? It must have been very tough.
It was incredibly tough. And I don't for 1 minute, when I look back on that time, think I had it as bad as so many other people. Of course, there were so many individuals and families that suffered a great deal. But at the same time, yes, to start a new job, to move down from Scotland to London, just everything was new and fresh. I'd only been at Mencap about 8 weeks when we went into lockdown. So it was a really challenging time personally as well. I made the decision to stay in London in the flat, which is a long way from my family who are all in Aberdeen. And of course, when the restrictions got really tough, I was stuck in London on my own for almost 11 weeks. So that was very difficult to be away from family and away from my son, Ross in particular, who has a learning disability. I don't think we've ever been apart for that long, excuse me. So yes, it was a challenging time, but I was still learning. I was meeting new people. I was trying to get to grips with, of course, what is a very large and complex charity. But I was just then suddenly thrown in at the deep end. If you recall that time, we, like a lot of social care charities, were trying to get our hands on the PPE that was in such short supply. We were campaigning against the use of the do not attempt resuscitation notices that were being put on the medical files of people with a learning disability. Within our own social care activity, we were dealing with outbreaks, and sadly, a lot of illness and death. We lost people we support, and we lost colleagues in those early stages. So it was a real crisis management, obviously not the job that I'd thought I'd applied for. And I just had to adjust, as my whole team did, to this very fast-paced change. But there were some good things about it too. It catapulted me into relationships and forums that maybe could have taken me, a few years of knocking on doors to establish. And that's obviously held me personally, but Mencap in good stead ever since.
It certainly sounds like a baptism of fire.
It certainly was, yeah. But it's amazing, isn't it, what everybody managed to do during that time, particularly, I think, within the charity sector. And I absolutely couldn't have done it without the support of our trustees, my great colleagues at Mencap, and a whole range of other charity CEOs and other partners and self-advocates that supported me and held my hand during that time.
Yeah, people's resilience never fails to amaze, does it?
Yeah, it was incredible. And I hope we're still not through COVID, of course, but I do hope there is a time for reflection and for learning and for looking back and actually saying, wow, we saved lives during that time. And I hope there's an opportunity, particularly for the social care workforce, to get the recognition that they deserve.
Definitely. You've just led me lovely into my next question, actually, Edel. Now that we're sort of coming through COVID, as you say, what are the key lessons that we can take from this? What ways of working have Mencap adopted?
Yes, there's definitely lots of learning, both, I guess, good and bad, things that we did well and things that we maybe would do differently if we had our time again. And that probably applies to lots of people and organisations. But I think for me, going through the pandemic, it highlighted the inequalities in terms of learning disability that we already knew existed. And not that we, needed it, but I think we've been spurred on to campaign even more on injustice and discrimination, because a great big shining light just exposed those awful inequalities, particularly around health and stigma and discrimination. I think other learning, charities were needed when society was in that crisis. All sorts of charities and community groups were the organisations and the individuals who were right there, in the midst of things, helping people. And I think we demonstrated real agility and responsiveness, and we were led absolutely by our values. So I think if there is any learning, again, for society and maybe for some of our politicians, they should recognise charities as a key critical player, in that national response. And again, I think we should be recognised for that, and all of that learning should be taken forward. The value of the social care workforce, which I've already touched on, if we remember the days when we were on our doorsteps clapping for carers and recognising the wonderful work that social care workers were doing. And as I said, we lost colleagues to the virus, and now we're seeing exhaustion and burnout. It is a low paid sector, and we really must value this skilled profession for what it is, before we just don't have anybody who wants to come and work in social care, and we lose some of the loyal staff. And I don't mean just Mencap, I mean across the sector. We lose the valued people. And then the last point I'd just make is around new ways of working. Our office-based staff moved really quickly online. It was quite remarkable how within a matter of days, we were able to run this very large and complex charity from our front rooms with all the tech and all the support that we needed. It was quite remarkable. And it didn't appear to impact on productivity. In fact, I think it had the opposite effect. But without any doubt, it's had an impact on people's mental health and well-being. And I think that has to be acknowledged, and it has to be a focus, again, not just for Mencap, but for all charities across the UK.
Definitely. And your last answer has actually just touched on my next question. You're an interviewer's dream, Edel. This is great. So people with a learning disability have been left behind partly because of reduced social care support during COVID, of course, and family carers, as you say, are burnt out. What can the government do to address this?
Well, I guess on the whole, everyone is really pleased that we're now out of COVID restrictions in most parts of the UK anyway. And we're in this living with COVID phase. But I think there's very little public or government acknowledgement of the impact of the pandemic on people with a learning disability. They have been left behind. We know that many services that closed or were withdrawn for people with a learning disability have still not been reinstated. So we hear a lot of families who used to rely on respite or some day service provision, and across the country a lot of those services are not back fully running as they were before. We know from all the surveys that we've carried out that families are often left to cope alone, with many tragic stories really of families being at breaking point without access to that much needed social support. And there's an increase in mental health problems among people with a learning disability. And there's little or no understanding from government and from some professionals too that people with a learning disability can experience poor mental health in tandem with having a learning disability. And services for people with a learning disability around mental health are just not accessible at the moment. There's long waiting lists for care assessments. I've always thought that the government or the local authorities should have to publish their waiting lists in the same way we get fixated on the waiting lists in the NHS. And local authorities tell us about increasing demand and, of course, ever shrinking resources. And Mencap constantly, but with others, partnership with others, we're always campaigning, we're publishing our survey results, we're trying to get media attention, and we're lobbying government to try and bring about change. And there's some signs that we and others have been listened to. If you look at the new UK government white paper on social care reform, there's quite a lot of references to learning disability in there. But at the moment, it's just warm words, yeah. And it will mean nothing without some dedicated resources and some actions. So still a long way to go, and still an awful lot that government can do to improve things.
Definitely. Now, there's a huge inequality of healthcare services for people with a learning disability and autism. How can proper integration between health and social care fix this, do you think?
Well, we've all got our fingers crossed as England in particular sort of moves forward on the integration agenda. We all know the shocking statistics around life expectancy for people with a learning disability when compared with their non-disabled peers. And as I've said a few times already, we see the inequalities in accessing good healthcare, and also the human rights scandal that allows today, while we're having this conversation, more than 2,000 people with a learning disability and or autism to be locked away in very inappropriate environments, often far away from home in assessment and treatment units. And so I think we can't allow the NHS backlogs and the aftermath of the COVID pandemic to set us back. And I think that's our fear. This is why things like the Oliver McGowan mandatory training for all NHS staff is so important. So the principles, I think, around integrating health and social care are sound. They make a lot of sense. I think the resources that are available in the system should follow the person, and that's going to be a real challenge because we know how resources are allocated at the moment. Services, of course, should be personalised, whether you need a service from the NHS or whether you need some social care support. And they really must meet the needs of the people with a learning disability in this context and not the needs of the system. So we're watching really closely the implementation of the new integrated care systems, and we're working with people with a learning disability through our Treat Me Well campaigns to try and ensure that there is a named person responsible for learning disability and accountable for the provision of services to people with a learning disability in each integrated care service area. But again, there's concern that all the money will get sucked up into the NHS, leaving social care behind as a bit of a poor cousin. And we're also a bit concerned about the medical model of disability being used to allocate resources, and not really a great understanding of the needs of working age disabled adults. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, because I am an optimist. This is an opportunity for all of us to get something right, but it's again another really long journey, and I think we're going to have to constantly ensure that people with a learning disability are speaking up for themselves and being heard, and while all this system change is happening, that their needs are not forgotten in the process.
Yeah, I think you'll agree. I think the government sort of talk the talk for long enough. It's time to walk the walk.
Absolutely. And other nations in the UK have started on this journey already. I think you'll be aware I've worked in Scotland for the last 20 plus years, and they've already been on a journey to integrate health and social care, some of which has been a success, and some things haven't gone quite to plan. But it's absolutely necessary, and this is an opportunity to try and get it right.
Definitely. Now, prior to Mencap, Edel, you were CEO of Cornerstone, which is a Scottish charity. You pioneered transformational changes in the way people with a learning disability are supported, of course. What has been your biggest achievement to date, and what do you hope to achieve moving forward?
I had a sneak preview, as you know, of the questions beforehand, and I found this one very uncomfortable.
Don't be modest. Achieved a great deal.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, but I really mean it. All of my achievements are because I've worked alongside other really passionate and hardworking people, including, self-advocates, colleagues, and others. I love my time at Cornerstone. It was my first CEO role, so I learned a great deal, as we all do through experience. And we were a very brave organisation in trying out some different ways of working to try and deliver better outcomes for the people that we supported. And some things during that transformational change period worked really well, and other areas of the transformation didn't quite go to plan. But there's oodles of learning from that experience that can and does continue to benefit others. And of course, I've personally brought all that learning to Mencap. But some of the things I'm particularly proud of, I guess I'm proud of being the first female president of the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce. And as far as we know, it was the first time anyone from the charity sector or the third sector had ever been a president of any chambers of commerce. And I was also, or I'm also proud of being the EY Scotland Entrepreneur of the Year winner, not really because of anything I particularly did, but because the award recognised entrepreneurial talent in the charity sector. And again, I think a lot of the time people assume entrepreneurs only ever work in the private sector. But I think my biggest achievement is bringing up two sons who are both amazing young men, and now themselves are making a really positive difference in the world. So it has to be that one at the top of the list for me.
Excellent. Now, of course, as CEO of Mencap, what are your own personal values, and how do you ensure these are embedded through to your members?
Well, fortunately, I guess my values are very aligned to those of Mencap. And of course, when I saw the job was advertised and noted an interest, I was very keen to really understand the values of the organisation and its charitable purpose, because I wouldn't want to work in any organisation where my values weren't aligned with my professional ones. The values at Mencap, which we updated when we developed our new big plan, our new strategy, are to be inclusive, passionate, kind, and brave. So an interesting set of values, and they're embedded in everything that we do. And as I say, I think my personal values align nicely with those. I've always worked in public service, whether it was the Metropolitan Police or the NHS or the charity sector. And there's always been a strong emphasis on me wanting to do something around social justice and addressing inequality. And I guess that's aligned to values. I believe in in the goodness of people, and trying to support and bring out confidence and talent in people who've maybe not had the best start in life, or maybe for all sorts of reasons just haven't had the same opportunities. And my son that I mentioned a moment ago, one of my sons, Ross, who has a learning disability himself, he's taught me an awful lot about what's really important. And I hope the way that I live my life and the values that I hold dear reflect that.
Excellent. Now, Mencap recently announced, of course, that they were working with Holby City on a learning disability storyline. How important is it to you that people with a learning disability are reflected positively in the media?
Oh, it's so, so important. If we just cast our mind back 30 or 40 years, when, you know, many people with a learning disability were living in institutions and out of sight of society. So it's absolutely vital in order to sort of break down stigma and to address discrimination, that we see people with a learning disability, you know, in everyday life, absolutely as they should be. So yeah, we worked with the producers on Holby City. It's a great episode if you haven't seen it, to ensure that the storyline reflected what is often a real life experience for people with a learning disability. And I just think it's great to see more people who have a learning disability portrayed in the mainstream media. I mean, if you think about people like Tommy Jessup, the actor that played such a key role in Line of Duty, I mean, the whole country was watching Line of Duty, and to see
fantastic him
play that role so brilliantly well. He's, of course, a Mencap ambassador too, and a great role model. And then there's young men like George Webster, who's a presenter now on CBBS. Again, you know, children are growing up watching children's television and seeing a young man with Down syndrome presenting alongside his non-disabled peers. It's wonderful. And I don't know if if listeners are familiar with the Mencap Mythbuster campaign, but that's been really positively received. All our Mythbusters, from football coaches to swimmers, musicians, models, actors, they're all just incredible role models. And we're going to continue that campaign with a whole new set of Mythbusters coming along very soon.
I think it's great as well, Edel, that the BBC actually consulted with you on that storyline, because quite often the programmes will just do storylines about something they don't really know a great deal about. And like you say, it'll just be the cliched kind of things that people, you know, that might sort of misinform people.
Yes, there's a lot of stereotyping going on, not just in the world of disability, across the board, really. And we, you know, I don't know about you, but you watch things sometimes and sort of cringe that they can get it so wrong. Yeah. And without mentioning any, you know, some of the soap opera storylines that have involved people with Down syndrome or others with a learning disability have occasionally got things pretty wrong. So no, it is good. And we're I wouldn't say it's often, but pretty regularly asked to support the BBC and others, filmmakers and so on storylines. And the best way to do that, of course, is to introduce the producers to people with learning disability so they can speak to them themselves about their experiences.
Definitely. Now, Edel, I did write this question a while ago. I don't really want to say it now because Newcastle got thumped 5-1 off Tottenham Hotspur.
I know, I was watching.
Oh, nightmare. But anyway, I know you're a big football fan yourself. Tell us a little bit about your favourite team and why you got into football.
Yeah, I do love football. And I decided during the Euros in 1996, which is going back a bit now, that I really needed to start to show an interest in football, because, as I've said, I've got two sons who were very small then, about 6 and 8, and they just were like a lot of little boys, you know, starting to really enjoy football. And during the Euros, of course, there was so much attention on football that they started to get interested. So I decided that, you know, better to sort of be part of that and join in than sit on the sidelines. So our local team is Aberdeen Football Club. So from the Dons, that's right. So from a very early age in the context of my children, we got season tickets. Since I've moved to London for my job at Mencap, I've given up my season ticket, but the family still go, and I go when I can, when I'm at home. My husband's a Wolves fan, so we follow Wolverhampton Wanderers as well. But I had the opportunity to be one of the first trustees of the Aberdeen Football Club Community Trust when it was set up. It was great to be able to combine my love of football with my charity experience and my passion for helping others, because football, you'll know, is a really great vehicle for breaking down barriers. It's a really great leveler in so many ways. It's a way to unite people most of the time around a cause such as using football to help improve health or help disadvantaged people into work and so on. So yeah, that was a lovely thing to be able to do for a few years again before I moved to London, when sadly I had to step down. But yeah, love football. And in fact, this weekend, both my boys were visiting London, so my husband took them to see Charlton Athletic versus Lincoln, I think was the game. Shouldn't gender stereotype, but myself and my two daughter-in-laws went to see Cinderella at the theatre and they went off to the football.
If you're both very passionate, you and your husband, it's a good job you're in different leagues. Have you ever been to Molineux?
Yes, lots of times. Yeah, lots of times I've been to Molineux. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Our house is called Molineux.
Was that under sufferance on your part?
Well, I was told it's also the name of a French rose, so that's what I tell people when they ask me.
Excellent. You've taught me something there. Now, of course, recruitment has long been an issue for this sector, Edel, and the impact of Brexit and COVID has obviously been even more devastating. How can we boost the staffing levels to maintain the shortfall, both now and going forward?
Yeah, recruitment at the moment, well, recruitment and retention. I think we're in the social care sector experiencing the worst crisis in staffing that I've ever experienced. And it's obviously sector-wide. This is not just something that's happening at Mencap. And I think there's a combination of factors. There's COVID burnout. Colleagues are absolutely exhausted. When you think how hard they worked, how much additional, overtime and covering for colleagues that were self-isolating or shielding. In some cases, when COVID was at its worst, moving into some of the services and living there to reduce COVID infection, it's no wonder really that there's burnout. We're experiencing, of course, a really buoyant economy. And, you only have to look at the windows in the restaurants as you walk down the street, and there's jobs as kitchen porters. I'm not saying these jobs aren't important, but kitchen porters or waiting staff, jobs in Amazon where they're now paying, 11, 12 pounds an hour. And the social care sector just can't compete with that. Poor pay is absolutely a factor. And if there's one message that I'm desperately trying to get through to government, and obviously others are too, is that they do have some levers. The Welsh government are paying as a minimum the living wage, real living wage. Scottish government are paying as a minimum the real living wage. I just don't understand why the UK government won't even entertain that. Their response is, it's a privately run independent market and employers should be paying good wages, without any real understanding that we can only pass on the funding we get from local authorities. And it's not a valued profession in society. Unfortunately, I don't think it's understood. I don't think it's recognised for, the skilled profession that it is. And there's often a lack of career progression. So, people come and work in the sector, but if they're ambitious, if they want to move on and do more, there's very limited opportunities. And these are some of the things as an employer we're trying to tackle just now. So we have developed a new reward strategy at Mencap. It's still not good enough, but we're doing all that we can in the context of the funding that we receive from local government. And we're also introducing some new ways of working that we hope will help with recruitment and retention. So things that will provide more opportunities to develop a career in social care, and we hope will leave colleagues feeling that they work in a skilled, important and valued profession. So there are some things as employers we can do, but we really need someone in government to take notice that there's a real crisis in social care. And, if something isn't done quickly to value the profession. And goodness knows what's going to happen to many people with a disability and many older people who rely on social care to live their great lives.
Let's hope they listen to people like yourselves.
We'll keep shouting.
From the rooftops, of course. Now, on a slightly different tack, Edel, a strange question for you, but one I'm interested in anyway. If you were to have a dinner party, who would be your dream guests and why? Now, I'm guessing Sir Alex Ferguson, Willie Miller, and Gordon Strachan might be up there.
Well, they're not actually, but there is a footballer. So now I'm feeling guilty that I didn't pick anybody associated with Aberdeen. Yeah, I love this question. I was thinking to sort of fit comfortably around my table, I'll invite 5 people to join me. So we're a nice party of 6. And I think my first guest really has to be my husband, Steve, because he's a great cook, and he would be the only person around the table who could explain to the guests what they're eating. He's also a good conversationalist and lots of fun to be with. And I think he'd be very upset if I didn't invite him. But second, this is my football person. I would like to invite Gareth Southgate.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'd love to talk football with him. And my next guest is someone who's no longer with us. So this might be stretching the question a wee bit. But if she was alive, I'd really love to invite Jane Austen.
Oh, yes.
I'm a great fan of her books. And I read the books when I was in my teens. And considering when she wrote them, I can imagine that she was a really kind of feisty person and someone who wanted to challenge the status quo. And I'd really love to know, if she was alive, what books she'd be reading now. I bet she could give me some great recommendations. Next guest I thought would be Michelle Obama. Can you imagine having Michelle Obama round to your house for dinner? Her life story is absolutely amazing. I don't know if you've read her book. And I'd really just like the opportunity to get to know her. And then finally, I'd invite Billy Connolly.
Oh, different class. I'm a comedian, so he's my hero.
Yeah, he's amazing. So he'd bring a little bit of Scotland into the room, and goodness, would he make us laugh. So yeah, that would be my dream dinner party.
It sounds like a great dinner party. And would it be at Molyneux? Would it be down in London?
Oh, I think it would have to be at Molyneux, because the flat in London, as lovely as it is very tiny. Very so yes, I'd struggle to get 4 people around the table here. A little bit more room in Scotland.
Excellent. And finally, Edel, if you had a magic wand and you could have 3 wishes, what would you wish for? Now, I would imagine so far you've touched on quite a few of them anyway, but if you want to reiterate any, please feel free.
Yes, and they probably are a little bit repetitive in terms of what I've already said, but it's good to draw out the kind of 3 main things, isn't it? So my first one would be that we don't talk about social care as a thing, a system, a service, but rather, if I may borrow a definition from Social Care Futures, that social care becomes about living in a place that we call home with the people and things that we love, in communities where we look out for each other, doing the things that matter to us. And until we can sort of shift the language and the thinking from systems to people, I think it's going to continually be, a challenging sector to work in. So that'd be my first wish. The second one, I have said this already, but would be that we invest properly in the people who work in social care. Let's value the skilled professionals that they are and pay them a decent wage. And then the third one would be that people with a learning disability who require support to live their best lives are always treated with dignity and respect. And this would include the immediate closure of the long stay hospitals.
Right, excellent. Can I say, Edel, it's been an absolute pleasure to interview you today. We really appreciate your time. I know you're such a busy lady.
Thank you so much. I've just been interrupted, so I really hope that doesn't appear on the camera by my son Ross, who's just decided to walk in right behind me. He has. So I'm quite glad I've got a blurred background, or you'd have seen him in his towel. But there you go. So sorry, slightly distracted there at the end. But no, it's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed speaking to you too. And I hope the listeners enjoy listening to the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edel. Our next guest will be announced very soon, so keep an eye on our social media. A reminder that the link to nominate for the Social Care Top 30 is in the podcast description.